Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking Special Edition. My guest today is Under Secretary Azra Zia. She is responsible for civilian security, democracy and human rights from the US State Department, and she is now visiting Bangladesh. Under Secretary Azra Zia has a long diplomatic career. She has extensive experience in diplomacy, international affairs and democracy, human rights. And she has held various positions within the State Department of the United States. Now she is visiting Bangladesh, and we are welcoming Under Secretary Azra Zia on Frankly Speaking. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Zahir. I'm delighted to be with you today on what is my first visit to Bangladesh.
It's a great pleasure indeed for us and for our audience too. And first of all, I know that you had a very hectic schedule in Bangladesh. As it is the first visit, you visited Rohingya refugee camps and also met with our Prime Minister, met several ministers and also other stakeholders. So very first, I would love to know that few of your highlights. Could you please share some of the highlights about the meetings and discussions and your objective of the visit?
Well, Zahir, as you mentioned, it's been an action-packed visit, an action-packed 2.5 days in Dhaka, and so many things to highlight. We had a very productive and engaging series of meetings today with the Honorable Prime Minister and the Ministers of Law, Home, and the Foreign Secretary. But that was preceded by a very moving visit, a full-day visit yesterday to Cox's Bazar, where we toured extensively the camps and had the opportunity to consult with senior Bangladeshi officials, with our vital UN humanitarian partners, as well as speak to the camp residents themselves and hear about their experiences and what we collectively can do to support them and the communities that host them. In my meetings with the Honorable Prime Minister and the ministers, we covered a number of issues, but some of the highlights included affirming our commitment to free and fair and peaceful elections here in Bangladesh, and exploring ways that we can deepen humanitarian cooperation to support the Rohingya and the communities that host them. And on this front, Zahir, I'm very pleased to share with you an announcement that we made earlier today that the United States will be providing an additional $74 million in humanitarian assistance to support the Rohingya here in Bangladesh, those displaced in Burma, as well as the many Bangladeshi communities that host them. And this is bringing the U.S. total contribution to Rohingya crisis response to over $2.1 billion since 2017. We're very proud to be the world's leading international humanitarian donor for the Rohingya and that response, but we're urging other international donors to do more. Other issues that we discussed included the very important contributions that civil society and independent media actors, journalists like yourself, make to thriving democracy. So I was also very honored to have the chance to meet some civic leaders as well. So it's been, as you said, somewhat of a frenetic visit, but I'd say a highly productive one. And I'm so grateful for the hospitality by our Bangladeshi hosts.
Madam Under Secretary, as you mentioned Rohingya issue, could you please share some insight about the repatriation process? Is there any significant efforts that have been underway for the repatriation?
Well, absolutely. And repatriation was one of the topics we discussed at length with those many individuals supporting the population at Cox's Bazar, as well as in all of our meetings today with the Honorable Prime Minister and government ministers. So first, I want to underscore what I conveyed to them. The United States' deep gratitude for the remarkable generosity that the government of Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh has shown to this very vulnerable population. And the United States, for our part, on the subject of repatriation, we do support the voluntary repatriation of Rohingya to Burma, but only under conditions that are conducive to safe, dignified, and sustainable voluntary returns. Now, unfortunately, these conditions do not currently exist in Burma. So we are continuing to consult with like-minded partners, including the government of Bangladesh. We are also urging all concerned to organize any efforts in coordination and partnership with the UN High Commission of Refugees, consistent with long-established standards regarding repatriation of refugees. And on this point, I want to make clear that I was very heartened to hear a direct affirmation from the government of Bangladesh in my meetings today on their commitment against any forced involuntary returns.
Is there any impediments you see related to Burma Act implementation?
Well, the Burma Act, which is the Burma Unified Through Rigorous Military Accountability, is U.S. legislation from 2021, which I see as an additional tool of accountability that gives the president the ability to impose sanctions on entities that are undermining Burma's democratic processes and human rights. We see these accountability tools as valuable elements of our efforts to, frankly, augment pressure on the regime in Burma to, one, cease its violence, but two, to restore the country's democratic path.
Madam Under Secretary, coming back to the free and fair election issue, there has been a lot of discussion, some perceptions are also there that the United States is escalating pressure on Bangladesh about improving its democratic credentials, and you are just taking some actions like sanctions, which has been imposed in 2021, and visa restriction policy, which has also been enforced as part of your United States approach to see a free, fair election in Bangladesh. So is there any significant development you see? What is your view about how you measure, how you gauge the impact of the actions you have taken in Bangladesh related to free and fair election in Bangladesh?
Correct your perception a bit respectfully, Zahir. As I stated at the outset, this visit is about the importance of Bangladesh as a partner to the United States, our desire as the U.S. government to deepen that partnership, but also our view that this partnership is anchored in shared democratic principles and human rights. And I want to say a little bit more, again, about the longevity and the breadth of U.S.-Bangladesh partnership. Many people may be not aware that Bangladesh is the leading development partner for the United States in all of Asia. And in fact, since your independence, the U.S. has put forward more than $8 billion in assistance in sectors like health, agriculture, humanitarian assistance, COVID response, where in fact Bangladesh was the leading recipient in the entire world of U.S.-provided COVID vaccines, over 100 million total. So our partnership is broad, it is impactful, and it's really delivering results. Exactly. But I would also put forward to you that the United States is seeking to build a closer partnership with Bangladesh on democracy and human rights as well. So the 3C decision, as it's called, our announcement of this policy of visa restrictions for those who impede or seek to undermine free and fair elections, it was put forward absolutely in a spirit to support the Prime Minister's stated commitment to free and fair and peaceful elections. And that's something that I heard very affirmatively in the discussions we had today.
You view, considering the ground realities. Yesterday, we have seen that two major parties, our warring parties, they have staged street rallies.
Right.
And still the situation is confrontational. There is no consensus about the holding the election. The government is seemingly rigid to hold the election in the constitutional framework. They are saying that constitutional or the legal framework is absolutely fine. But the opposition, they are saying that they will not take part in the election. So, I mean, how the contentious issues will be resolved? Is there any light you can shed on this, and how do you consider that the situation, in your view, what is the ideal situation, ideal condition for a free and fair election in Bangladesh?
Well, let me be clear here, as I hear it. For the United States, our objective is to support elections in Bangladesh that are free and fair and peaceful, and that allow the people of Bangladesh to choose their own leaders. Now, this is consistent with our global policies on democracy and human rights, and a U.S. administration under President Biden who has really asked us to center democracy and human rights in our foreign policy. On the other hand, on the issues that you raised, the question of potentially a caretaker government or a boycott, these are internal matters for the people of Bangladesh, and we don't see a role for the United States. And I just want to underscore a final point. We do not take sides between political parties.
Okay. So would the United States consider to send election observer to monitor the electoral process in Bangladesh?
Well, we are examining this question, and in fact, it did come up in the discussions. We are aware of the government's openness to welcoming election observers. So this is something that we're assessing and will be in discussion with the government. It's something also that the United States does all over the world.
Okay, let us talk something about the Indo-Pacific strategy. We have seen that it has gained significance in the recent years, and Bangladesh also dished out its Indo-Pacific outlook.
Right.
So how does it relate that the United States can engage with Bangladesh, and where is the room or areas of collaboration within the framework of IPS?
Well, for my part, I think the United States and Bangladesh have a largely convergent vision for the Indo-Pacific region. So for our part, the United States is interested in really seeking to advance an Indo-Pacific that is open and free and more connected, more resilient, more prosperous, and more secure. Now, today, without getting into too much detail of diplomatic discussions, the Honorable Foreign Secretary and I did discuss ways that we could further translate what I see as a shared vision for the Indo-Pacific into concrete cooperation. And this cooperation is already occurring. One of the important areas is in combating transnational crime, and specifically trafficking in persons. We have our annual trafficking in persons report mandated by Congress, where we've seen progress by Bangladesh reflected in that report, and in Bangladesh moving up to the Tier 2 category, and we've seen increased prosecutions. We are also calling for increased efforts to protect and identify victims and hold perpetrators accountable with meaningful sentences. But we are also very committed to partnering with Bangladesh on trafficking in persons. So I can give you a little scoop here today, as I hear later tonight, I will be announcing a new $1 million contribution from the State Department to the Freedom Fund, which will help protect and help rehabilitate child survivors of the terrible scourge of human trafficking. So this is just one example, I think, of many others in which we can work together to build a more free and open Indo-Pacific in concrete ways.
So there is huge potential room for collaboration in the coming days.
I absolutely believe so.
But pertinently, before coming to Bangladesh, you visited India. Did you discuss Bangladesh issue, in the context of regional challenges?
Well, my visit to India was part of regular consultations with Indian government counterparts, and also in my dual hat role as special coordinator for Tibetan issues. So on this point, Zahir, I would say reflecting from this week of meetings, I see convergence between our three governments in terms of the benefits and a vocation for a more free and open Indo-Pacific that's more resilient, connected, secure, and prosperous.
Undersecretary Azra, we have a few more questions, but before that, I need to take a very short break.
Sure.
Dear viewers, we are taking a very short break. My guest today is Undersecretary of State Azra Zia. She is visiting Bangladesh, and we'll be back right after the commercial. Stay with us. Hello, this is Zahir Alum. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking Special Edition. My guest today is Undersecretary Azra Zia.
নির্বাচন প্রশ্নে যুক্তরাষ্ট্রের সর্বশেষ অবস্থান, নির্বাচন প্রক্রিয়া দেখতে পর্যবেক্ষক পাঠানোর পরিকল্পনা, সেন্ট মার্টিন ও র্যাব নিয়ে ওয়াশিংটনের ভাবনা, ইন্দো প্যাসিফিক সহযোগিতা, রোহিঙ্গা প্রত্যাবাসনের সম্ভাবনা, নির্বাচন সামনে রেখে সরকার ও বিরোধী রাজনৈতিক দলগুলোর কাছে প্রত্যাশা।
The United States is escalating pressure on Bangladesh about improving its democratic credentials.
3C decision, as it's called, our announcement of this policy of visa restrictions for those who impede or seek to undermine free and fair elections. It was put forward absolutely in a spirit to support the Prime Minister's stated commitment to free.
Welcome back. You're watching Frankly Speaking. My guest is Madam Azra Zia. She is the Undersecretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights visiting Bangladesh. Madam Azra Zia, coming back to Bangladesh, there has been a lot of, rhetoric, political rhetoric that about St. Martin Islands. And some says that there has been some sort of negotiation or discussions. Do you really have any sense about the plan or proposal related to St. Martin Islands?
Let me be very clear on this. There is absolutely no plan on this. The United States respects Bangladesh's sovereignty, and there have not been any discussions about a potential lease of St. Martin's Island.
Okay. About 2021 sanction against Rapid Action Battalion
Right.
and its officials. Some of the State Department officials who have been visiting Bangladesh cautiously express their optimism that progress are slow but remarkable. They applaud it, cautiously applaud. Do you think that there is any room for lifting or repeal the ban in the coming days? Or if yes, what it takes to lift the ban in the coming days?
Well, with respect to the sanctions that were imposed on the Rapid Action Battalion in December 2021, this was a decision that was the result of careful research and consideration of information. And in fact, since those sanctions were imposed, we have seen a constructive development in terms of a documented reduction in reported extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. But on the question of lifting the sanctions, I would underscore that we would need to see accountability for past and current abuses, meaningful reform of the institution of RAB, and I think these are considerations to take in mind with respect to a potential lifting of sanctions.
You're seriously dealing with the human rights in many areas globally. Also, I didn't mention that you're the special coordinator related to Tibet. So, promoting human rights in the countries, especially the developing nations, how it can be well monitored, how it can be actually properly dealt with. Is there any suggestion, is there any tools or instrument you see for maintaining strong human rights record in the countries like Bangladesh?
Sure. Well, as you noted, Zahir, the United States diplomacy on human rights is truly global. So, this is an endeavor of every U.S. embassy in the world. And, it comes from a bipartisan consensus in the United States that, as we work to improve and advance human rights at home, we have a vocation, even an obligation as Americans to defend the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and to help governments and societies make progress in these areas. But I mention societies because this is ultimately not just the work of governments. Civil society actors, journalists like you, champions for equality, for progress, for inclusion, for transparency, anti-corruption efforts, all of the public health, the list goes on. I mean, all of these non-governmental actors are too vital stakeholders in building ultimately more free and open, successful, sustainable, thriving societies. So I think it's important that we look for opportunities to partner with a broad set of stakeholders, but that we also work to shine a light on human rights shortcomings and abuses so that we can correct and hold to account those who are violating the rights of others.
Madam Undersecretary, your final thoughts about partnership between the United States and Bangladesh. It's been long-standing, and we have already passed 50 years, and we are looking at another 50 years ahead. So how do you see the significance of bordering or furthering the bilateral partnership between the United States and Bangladesh?
Well, I depart Dhaka shortly with a renewed sense of determination on our potential to deepen our partnership and a real appreciation of Bangladesh's immense potential and our role as Americans to help this country progress and thrive.
Any message from you for the political parties in Bangladesh?
Well, I think the one message I would underscore is urging all parties to reject violence and to support a genuinely inclusive, peaceful, free and fair democratic process. Let's let the people of Bangladesh decide.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zahir.
Secretary, thank you so much. Deeply appreciated your time. Thank you so much. Dear viewers, that's all my conversation with Undersecretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights from the United States. We thank you indeed for watching this show, and we invite you to watch our next programs. Thank you so much. Goodbye.